Welcome back for Module 5, the AI risk and impact assessment. So before you deploy any AI output in client work, you must assess what it can get wrong first. Okay. Now, in our scenario, we've got Halstead Cole's litigation team adopted ChatGPT 4.0 for case chronologies 6 months ago, basically using ChatGPT to help them put together a timeline of important events, but in date order, for example. Okay. Now, no one questioned ISO 42001 clause 6.1 requires every organization to ask before deploying an AI system. So, what happens when this goes wrong, or how likely is that? And what is the impact on a client if something does go wrong? Okay, so we've got the firm, which is Halstead Cole LLP. Now, because we've covered the previous modules, Halstead Co now has a signed AI policy. They also have a AI register system, which has 5 AI systems documented within it. Now, what is missing is a single completed risk assessment. This is something that they haven't done. Now, Pemberton, being their main client, in their AI governance questionnaire that they sent through, question 3 is how do you identify and manage AI specific tasks? Now, the worst and exposed system within Halstead & Co is ChatGPT for within the litigation team. This holds a high residual risk. Now, in terms of the deadline of this questionnaire, they have 16 days remaining. Now, for the CLP, the CLP's exposure is aggravating factor under SRA Rule 8.1, Section A. Okay, so let's look at what clause 6.1 actually requires. So when it comes to 6.1 of the ISO IEC 42001 2023, it creates 2 distinct but linked obligations, and law firms routinely satisfy neither. The standard requires consideration of risks and opportunity, planning of actions to address them, and evaluation of the effectiveness of those actions. Now, within the Annex A controls A.2.2 through to A.6.1.6, this produces a structured AI risk and impact register, the document that gives every other AI management system control its proportionality rationale. So let's just break that down into plain English. So when it comes to the clause 6.1, it is think before you act. So before deploying an AI system, the firm must formally identify what could go wrong, evaluate how bad each thing would be, decide what controls will reduce the risk, and define how those controls will be checked for effectiveness. This is the same discipline a solicitor applies to a complex legal transaction. So the 2 obligations, distinct and linked. So risk assessment, and this is continuous, an ongoing process for identifying and evaluating risks at the system level. So for each AI management system entry, the firm maintains a current assessment that covers likelihood, impact, and existing controls. Output, Part A of the Reg AI Management System risk document, updated quarterly. Without it, no other AI management system control can be collaborated proportionately. You cannot determine whether 100% human review or spot check review is appropriate without knowing the risk level. Then you have the impact assessment, which is triggered. An event triggered deep dive required before a new AI system is deployed for the first time. An existing system is extended to a new use case or practice area, or a material change occurs, for example, model version or significant prompt change. Now, the output for the impact assessment is Part B of the Register AI Management System risk document, signed before deployment or change. Without it, clause 6.1 is satisfied for ongoing systems, but not for the most important moments when something new enters production. Now let's just touch upon the common conflation here. So many ISO 42001 implementation guides treat this as synonymous. They are not. Risk assessment is a standing process, produces the risk register, updated quarterly. Impact assessment is the event triggered deep dive, produces a pre-system assessment document, completed before deployment or material change. Now, a firm with a risk register but no impact assessment process fails clause 6.1. A firm that runs impact assessments but has no standing risk register also fails. The register AI management system risk documentation contains both instruments in one controlled document. So, what does the SRA require? Now, the SRA's 9th of February 2026 AI guidance does not have the phrase risk assessment. It uses the language of professional judgment. So, solicitors must consider the risks of using AI tools before adopting them in practice, including the risk of AI generated errors going undetected. This is risk assessment under a different name. Okay, so let's look at the ways that a firm can fail clause 6.1. And we have 5 of them here. Now, quick note, most firms don't fail because they ignored clause 6.1 entirely. They fail because some form of risk thinking was in place without satisfying what the standard actually requires. So, the first one, no risk process at all. So the firm has adopted AI tools and has never formally assessed the risk of any of them. The risk register does not exist. This is the baseline state for the majority of law firms below 200 fee earners. Now, when it comes to the audit finding, there's no documented evidence of AI risk assessment process exists. So when it comes to clause 6.1, that obligation is unaddressed. Next, we got the general IT risk register. Some firms maintain an IT cyber risk register. This does not satisfy clause 6.1 because it does not address AI specific risk factors, hallucinations, for example, or hallucinations and output accuracy, bias in AI generated legal analysis, confidentiality of data processed by external models, the impact of the model version changes on output quality, and the professional liability implications of AI assisted advice. And when it comes to the audit findings, existing risk register address generic IT risks, but does not include the AI specific risk factors required by the ISO 42001 Annex A.2.2 through to A.6.1.6. Okay, next you have impact assessment trigger. It's too late, or it doesn't happen at all. Now, even where firms have a risk register, the impact assessment is treated as optional or is conducted retrospectively. Clause 6.1 and Annex A.2.2 requires the impact assessment before deployment. An assessment completed after a system has been in production for 6 months is evidence of a governance gap and not a governance process. Now, the audit finding. Impact assessment for the AI management system was completed in X month, 6 months after the deployment commenced. Pre-deployment assessment obligations under Annex A.2. was not met. So that's what will be discovered within an audit. Next, you got controls identified but not verified. So some risk registers list controls, for example, human review for output, without verifying that the control is actually implemented, effective, and consistently applied. ISO 42001 clause 6.1 requires the firm to plan how to evaluate the effectiveness of these actions. A control that exists on paper but is not evidenced in practice is not a control for the purpose of the standard. So when it comes to an audit, auditor will see listed controls are not evidenced through review logs, sign-off records, or sampling. So the effectiveness evaluation is absent. Finally, we have the failure 5, and that is register not updated after system changes. So model version updates from vendors being OpenAI, Microsoft, Leap Legal, for example, can materially change AI system behavior. A risk register that was accurate for ChatGPT 4 in January may not be accurate for the updated model released in March. The standard requires the risk assessment to be current, which means it must be reviewed and updated whenever a material change occurs to any registered system. Now, what would the auditor find? In this case, the auditor will see that the risk register was last reviewed in months, let's just say in month of February. Since then, multiple model version updates has occurred. Currency of the risk assessment under clause 6.1 cannot be evidence. So the auditor cannot find any evidence that there was any assessment done on the new model before the firm started using the new model. Okay, let's look at the 8 AI specific risk factors. So what standard risk registers miss about AI? All right. Now, generic risk registers apply generic factors: likelihood, impact, severity. So now generic risk registers apply generic factors like likelihood or impact or severity. When it comes to the ISO 42001 Annex A and the legal sector's AI risk landscape require 8 specific factors for AI in legal practice. Now, the Register AI Management System risk document scores each system against all 8. Each card below shows the factor, plain English description, and the weight it carries in the firm's scoring framework. So let's look at these 8 risk factors. All right. So first one, you've got output accuracy and hallucinations. So likelihood that the system generates plausible but factual incorrect output like citations, dates, legal propositions in the firm's use context. Now the weight this carries for the firm is high. Legal citation errors are a direct professional liability trigger. Now, as a reminder, let me remind you of this case that I discovered, which triggered me to create this module for you guys, is that back in June of 2020, a law firm submitted to the courts. So actually, where was it? Page 4, go down. So we have 2 lawyers that used ChatGPT and submitted the documentation produced by ChatGPT to court on behalf of the client. And it turned out that the AI output was entirely fabricated, falsely attributing nonsensical opinions to real judges and embellished with further false citations and docket numbers held by actual cases totally irrelevant to the matter at hand. Okay, so that's just a reminder. These kind of things happen. This is a real case. They got fined, I think, close to 90 million. So output accuracy and hallucinations weighs high on Halstead Co. Because if any document that is being produced by AI does get submitted to court, this could happen. Okay, so that's the output accuracy and hallucinations. Next, let's look at the confidentiality and data leakage. So risk that data, client data, entered into the AI system is retained and used for training or accessible to third parties under the vendor's data term. Again, this weighs high. And when it comes to the SRA Principle 6, it's all about client confidentiality, and it is absolute. Okay, so let's look at some medium high. Okay, next we've got bias and discriminatory output. Risk that AI output reflects training data bias in ways that disadvantage protected characteristic clients, immigration, family, or employment matters. Now the weight of this is medium high, and this falls in lines with the Equality Act 2010 and SRA Principle 6 implications. Then we have the transparency to affected parties. Risk that clients and counterparts are unaware that AI was used in producing advice, correspondence, or submissions, and the professional obligations this creates. Again, this is medium weight, and this will actually fail Annex A.2, which is about the client disclosure obligations. Next, let's look at transparency to affected parties. Now, this is where the risk that clients or counterparts are unaware that AI was used in producing advice, correspondence, or submissions, and the professional obligations this creates. Now, the weight for Halstead Co. is medium, and this has a risk factor with the Annex A.2, where it covers client disclosure obligations. Now we move on to human oversight adequacy. Risk that the oversight mechanism designed for the system is inefficient to catch the errors the system is capable of producing at the frequency it produces them. And the risk here, medium high again, so it varies by use case and error detection. Then we have supply chain and vendor dependency. Risk arising from changes to AI system outside the firm's control, model updates, vendor term changes, service discontinuation, or vendor data breach. Now, this risk cross-references with Gap 9, which is the supply chain. Gap 9 is module 10, which we'll cover, but it cross-references that. They overlap, so to speak. Okay, now we've got the regulatory and legal compliance. So, risk that AI use creates regulatory exposure under the SRA framework, UK GDPR, or emerging AI-specific legislation that the firm has not identified or mitigated for. All right, so this risk factor, the dynamic risk, and requires quarterly review. Then you have the operational resilience, risk that the firm becomes operationally dependent on AI systems without an adequate fallback process when those systems are unavailable or degraded. So what's the risk here? The risk is business continuity dimension. Now, why is there 8 risks and not the standard 5? The generic enterprise risk register score operational, financial, reputational, regulatory, and strategic risks. AI introduces failure modes that don't fit those buckets. So, model drift after a vendor update, hallucinated legal citations appearing in court submissions, undocumented bias in client advice, and the loss of legal professional privilege through third-party data processing. Each of the 8 factors above maps to a specific ISO 24001 Annex A control. That is what makes the assessment auditable rather than just merely thoughtful. All right, so that's why there's 8 risk factors rather than the generic 5. All right, okay, let's look at the scoring methodology. Now, the Reg AI Management System risk document uses the 5x5 likelihood impact matrix. Each of the 8 risk factors is scored on both axes, 1 to 5, and the product score determines the risk rating. So low is 1 to 4, medium is 5 to 9, high is 10 to 19, critical is 20 to 20. Controls reduce the likelihood score, but not the impact, because a catastrophic outcome remains a catastrophic outcome, even if made less likely by a control. Now, the way I've created this here is that you could click, it's interactive, so you could click any cell and it will give you the score explanation underneath. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see, it gives you the relevant information about that score here. The one that we're going to talk about with regards to this scenario with Halstead Co., they are using ChatGPT 4.0. So they have a score of 12, which is high. And let's look at the breakdown of that score. So the likelihood of ChatGPT hallucinating gives a score of 3 because it is possible. Okay. Now the impact is major. So ChatGPT hallucinating has a major risk factor for Halstead & Co. Now the product score is 12. And this is the score before any actual controls has been put in place. Now, how do Halstead Cole fix this? Now, they fix this by implementing enhanced controls, an AGL sign off by the board. So basically, the board will check the AI against architectural standards, security rules, and so on. And this plan, the plan to fix it, has a set timeline. All right, so there's a set deadline in which these controls needs to be implemented. Once the controls are implemented, then there's a rescoring. What is meant to happen when the controls are put in place, that when it comes to hallucinating, that possibility should come down to unlikely or rare, which in turn will reduce the actual overall score. However, it will still be a major impact to the firm if it ever does. And I think I explain it down here actually. So, how to read the matrix. So, likelihood measures how often the risk is expected to materialize given the firm's specific use context. All right, not the vendor's published hallucination rates and their charts. The impact measures the severity if the risk does not materialize. The product is the inherent risk score before the controls. Now, after the controls are applied, like I said, only the likelihood score reduces, never the impact. So, for example, catastrophic, the likelihood stays at 3, being a possible or even higher. Okay? So when it comes to the impact, doesn't change. The aim is to bring the likelihood score down to its lowest. So now let's focus on the fix. And the fix is building the Reg AI Management System risk document. And this can be done in 5 steps. All right. Now, the risk register closes gap 4 and is the analytical foundation for gap 5, 6, 7, and 8. Without it, the controls in the gaps cannot be proportionately collaborated. Below are the 5 steps Halstead Co. takes to build this register. So let's take a look at these 5 steps. Okay, let's look at step 1. Now, step 1, each AI management system entry, so each AI tool that has been entered in the AI management system document becomes one risk assessment record in the register AI management system risk document. The register owner leads the assessment. The COLP and the AGL participate for any system touching client-facing work or privileged data. Okay? Now, step 2 is to score against these 8 factors. Now, for each factor, record the inherent likelihood before the controls on a 1 to 5 scale and the impact on a 1 to 5 scale. And just a reminder, as you can see here, we've got the 1 to 5 scale for the impact, and you've got the 1 to 5 scale here for the likelihood. So now the product is the inherited risk score before the controls. Remember, a score of 20 plus is critical, and that requires board level sign off and enhanced controls before deployment proceeds. This baseline score before any controls is what tells you whether the system is deployable at all. Step 3, the control must be concrete, not human review, but fee earner review for every AI output against source documents before use in any client matter, with sign-off recorded in the matter file. After controls are applied, rescore the likelihood only, because the residual risk must fall to medium or below for the system to proceed to active deployment without enhanced oversight. Now we're at step 4. Now, for any system being deployed for the first time or extended to a new use case, complete part B. And this is the structured impact assessment. This covers all categories of people potentially affected by the AI system's output. So this could be the client, the counterparties, witnesses, courts, of course. The impact on each group if the system produces an error and whether a client disclosure obligation arises. Part B must be signed by the AGL before production. Then finally you have step 5, which is the review and update on trigger events. So review is required quarterly on any model version change. on any AI incident or near miss, and on any new regulatory development. Each review creates a new version of the affected risk record, maintaining a full audit trail. Now, based on the scenario that we're working with throughout these modules, what I've got here is a worked assessment. All right, and we're using the ChatGPT 4.0 in litigation. Below is the Part A risk assessment as it would appear in the Reg AI Management System risk document at the initial issue. So this is before controls are fully implemented. This actually represents the honest baseline for Halstead Co. It's inherent risk elevated, controls partly in place, 2 risks remaining high until Gap 7 and Gap 8 for Halstead Co. has been remedied and fully complete. So let's take a look at that quickly. So, all right, so the AI management system that we're going to look at is the ChatGPT 4.0. And so when we're looking at the output accuracy and the hallucination, before the controls, what you have is ChatGPT produces plausible sounding legal citations that do not exist at a rate that varies with the prompt design. Now, in litigation use, without a carefully constrained prompt, risk of citation hallucination is possible, gives a score of 3. The impact of a submitted fabricated citation is major. So now if we scroll up to back to the actual matrix, you could see here, possible 3, major 4, and here we have a score of 12, which is a high rating because of where it sits in the matrix. Okay. Now, when controls are in place, you have fee earner verification of every citation against primary source before use. The residual likelihood is now, instead of possible, it drops down 1 to unlikely. Oops, gone too far. Gone down to unlikely, which is a score of 2. So it brings the residual score down to medium, which is 8. So if I go back up again, when we bring that down from the possible to unlikely, we get a score of 8. Okay. All right. What's the next one? Confidentiality and data leakage. Halstead & Co. has API access under Zero Data Retention Enterprise Agreement. Client data submitted via API is not used for model training. Data processed outside UK by default. Standard contractual clauses apply. So the inherent score is 10, but when controls are put in place, which is API access only, so no consumer UI, the data processing agreement is in place, no special category data submitted without separate approval, and that will bring the score down to 5. Then you have the bias and discriminatory output. Now, the litigation chronology and correspondence use has limited exposure to bias risk compared to advice given context. Current use does not include immigration, family, or employment matters. So the initial inherent score was 6. Once the controls are in place, which is scope restriction in the policy AI management system document, will bring the score down to 4, which is low. Next, we've got transparency and client disclosure. So clients are not currently informed that AI is used in producing case chronologies or correspondence. Obligation to disclose is not yet assessed. So Annex A.2 disclosure control is not implemented. So the inherent score is 15, but when the controls are in place, which is pending Gap 7, we'll get there in these modules, which is the document AI management system disclosure document, that score still remains at 15. Now, human oversight and adequacy. Let's look at the human oversight adequacy. So current oversight is ad hoc. Fee earners are expected to review output, but there is no recorded sign-off process, no defined review standard, and no evidence trail. So the inherent score is 16. Now with the controls in place, which is the PROC AI management system human in the loop document, we will touch upon that in Gap 8, which is module 9, pending implementation. Now, the residual score will stay pending until we have closed gap 8, which we'll cover in module 9. So the score will still stay at 16. Then you have the supply chain and vendor. So OpenAI model version updates occur without mandatory advance notice. GPT-4 is pinned via API model parameter, provides version stability. The Reg AI management system document, part B, records the prompt version. Now, vendor dependency risk is moderate. Now, the inherit score is 8. But when controls are put in place, which is API model pinning plus prompt version control, the residual score drops to 6. Something to notice here, that there is 2 here that stays high even when controls are put in place. Okay, so the 2 mitigated high risk remain at the initial register issue. Transparency, client disclosure, which is score 15, that's this one here, and the human oversight adequacy, which scores 16, and that's this one here, are unmitigated at initial register issue. These scores will remain at high until gap 7, so that's the document AI management system disclosure document, and in gap 8, which is the PORC AI management system human in the loop document, are implemented. Remember, we're doing this in order. For example, you're starting with the policy. All right. So the Reg AI management system risk document must record this as open risks with targets to be remedied. And those targets are set deadline dates. An AI system with unmitigated high risk may continue in use if the AGL, so the board, explicitly accepts the residual risk in writing and records a remedy timeline, but it may not continue in use as though the risk does not exist. Now, before we get down to the questionnaire, I just want to make you aware that for each module, again, I provide a template of what these documents look like. And what you're looking at now is the AI risk impact register template. So we've got the section 1, the likelihood and impact scoring, just like the matrix table. So you've got the 1 to 5 for the likelihood, 1 to 5 for the impact, with an explanation of what these definitions mean. Now, part A, you've got the AI system risk register, and I have just some examples in here. So again, the different risk factors that we've already covered. You've got the initial scoring, the description of what the controls are, and then the score after the controls are put in place. Also included the owner of the different risk factors. So for example, output accuracy and hallucination, that would be the COLP, supervisor. When it comes to, let's pick a different one. When it comes to let's use this one. So confidentiality and data leakage. The owner of this would be the IT lead, right? So the tech lead. And even the supply chain and vendor, when it comes to getting the API for the model and implementing it, again, that is the tech lead. So you've got a column here that of the different individuals that are responsible for these risks. All right. Now remember, the purpose of this document that is each AI tool has to have its own risk assessment. So here we've got ChatGPT 4 in this example. Then we've got Copilot integrated with Microsoft 365. And again, same risk factors, initial score before controls, what controls needs to be put in place, and then the scoring afterwards, as well as the owner of which role within the firm owns the risk. Now, I've added this in here. We've got here Microsoft Office 365 in document drafting. Okay, so I've used Word. But also, as you know about the Microsoft ecosystem, that Copilot is pretty much injected into everything Microsoft. So here we've got Microsoft Copilot integrated into Outlook and used by fee earners for client email drafting. So it has its own risk assessment here as well. Then we've got the Leap AI, which is the AI tool specific for law firms. So matter management and time recording. And again, this has its own risk assessment. Then we go on to part B within the template, and you've got the AI system impact assessment forms. So here you are, further down, you've got the assessment questions, your guidance, and then the actual assessment. You've got space for the assessment findings. So section 4, we've got the formal risk acceptance record. So here we've got the different AI systems, what their risk factor is, what their current scores. Now, here is the date which the AGL, so the board, has accepted the risk. You've got information on the controls, the remedy controls that needs to be put in place, as well as the deadline. And then it requires the signature from the AGL. So what that means is that the AGL is actually signing off that the firm continues to use these systems regardless of the risk, but with a plan in place to fix these risks within an approved timeline. Then you've got the section 5, which is the quarterly review and version history in terms of any initial changes from the vendor, i.e. a new model. Now this template it's in Word, so feel free to edit it, change it, make updates, etc. Purpose of this is just to give you a visual of an actual document, which is an AI risk and impact register, and the language that's used within it. Okay. Now back to module 5. I've got here at the end a series of questions just to test your understanding. I'm not going to click on them. Again, this is a interactive HTML. If I click on it, it's going to obviously show the answer in the video, and I don't think that's fair. Download and test your knowledge as you've worked through the module. And then, like always, with all the other modules, I provided you with a checklist. So how have you understood this scenario? How have you understood the standard? How have you understood the failure modes and the risk factors? And then the readiness for module 6. Okay, so now when it comes to module 6, we're going to be moving away from assessments to lifecycle governance. Now this is where the risk register now is in place and the systems has been classified by its tier. So now when it comes to the lifecycle procedure document, which is the PROC AI management system lifecycle document, it provides the governance framework for what happens to those systems over time. All right, whether it's pre-deployment approval, active monitoring, version change review, model retirement, etc. Now, the procedure turns the static risk assessment into a dynamic control that responds to vendor changes, regulatory development, and incident learning. By the end of module 6, Halstead Cole, which is the law firm in this scenario, will have answered the Pemberton Capital question for and have a defensible lifecycle model for every AI system on its register. Exciting stuff. Okay, so once again, check out the link below. You could download this HTML module, work through it. It's interactive. Just to give you a reminder, for example, here, when you're looking at the risk scoring matrix, make sure you go through and understand the meaning behind each score. And as well as that, I've given you some nice test questions just to help test your knowledge, and the checklist feature as you're working through this module. And then on top of that, you've got your template that you can tweak and make changes to as you wish. Okay, so for now, let me let you go, and I will see you in module 6.